Secretary Lehman.
Madam Secretary, welcome. I would like to follow up with on many of the same subjects here. One of the constant refrains we've had in the over 1,000 interviews that we've done and through the documents that we have been studying is that there was a considerable dysfunction in the intelligence community, particularly with regard to sharing of information. A lot of people did not know about information that was in the government that was not shared, stovepiped, and many people were not playing with a full deck. So I'd like to ask your own view, some even with intelligence, about starting with your entry as Secretary of State. You'd been at the UN, you were part of the inner circle, the NSC, the cabinet. What was the picture that you had when you took over the reins as Secretary of State as to the nature of the threat, the terrorist threat?
When I came in as Secretary, which was February 1997, there was no question that we knew about a variety of threats. I had at the UN been involved with some of the issues to do with Sudan, where we were very concerned about the web of terrorist camps and support, etc., that were present in Sudan. If you remember, the Sudanese were implicated in an assassination attempt on President Mubarak, and it was as a result of that that we instituted or put in sanctions against Sudan. And so I clearly was aware of issues and was briefed, and also briefed in terms of some of the investigations to do with the World Trade Center. So one knew that there were various terrorist threats that we were dealing with, but on, as I pointed out in my remarks, kind of a whole new level of problems. And I did see, I have to say, something that you alluded to, which was a lack of communication already between the CIA and the FBI in terms of transmitting information to each other. And so what we tried to do was to bring them closer together with some difficulty. I think some to do with the culture of both those agencies, and something that I recommend finally that needs to be fixed. So I do think that there were issues in that regard. But on the whole, I think there was a lot of intelligence available, and the question is how it was read.
Well, specifically on the '93 attack on the World Trade Center, we have been told by some very senior officials that the complete picture of the evidence of the al-Qaeda links of the perpetrators were really not made known until after, shared within the government until after the trial of the blind sheikh. And the links of Abdul Rahman Yassin, for instance, were not widely known within the government. When did you, if you could think back, become aware of the close and many links between the '93 plotters and al-Qaeda?
I can't remember exactly. I mean, I think that, we began to know more about al-Qaeda sometime in '96, '97. We knew bin Laden was a financier that was involved in a variety of activities, but I honestly can't tell you exactly when I became aware of the various linkages.
Did you know about Abdul Rahman Yassin and his fleeing to Baghdad and his support and cooperation with Saddam's intelligence service? Did you see any significance in that? He being, of course, one of the main plotters of the '93 bombing.
I can't say that I remember that.
Just on that theme, the fact that Abu Nidal and Abu Abbas were there along with Yassin, would this have been a reason to begin to look a bit at what the Iraqi Secret Service was doing with Al-Qaeda and whether with or without Saddam's knowledge?
Again, my sense of all of this was that there were shadowy connections among a variety of groups, but in terms of this kind of specificity, frankly, that was not something that as Secretary of State I would have been looking into.
One of the questions, again, that have often been raised is after almost as soon as the Clinton administration came in, there was an attempt to assassinate President Bush. There was a very minor strike launched against the intelligence service of Saddam, the intelligence headquarters, and with the assurance that no one would be there, so it would be in the middle of the night. After the Khobar bombing, there were many in the administration who wanted to retaliate, but in fact nothing was done. After the '93 WTI attack, there essentially was nothing done pending the 5-year trial. After the embassy bombing, there was, again, an attempt to make cruise missile attacks against the training camps and then against the pharmaceutical plant in Sudan. As you'll recall, there were criticisms at the time that this was a wag the dog scenario, that it was during the various stages of the president's problems, and that there was no real evidence there, that it was an innocent pharmaceutical plant. You were part of the inner sanctum at the time. In your view, was there real evidence that this was part of a bin Laden network?
You've said a lot of different things. Let me just say that I do believe that when we had evidence, we used force, and the response on the '93, on the attempted assassination of President Bush, we reacted, I think, very strongly. That's certainly what the Iraqis thought. And I was the one that had the rather peculiar moment of delivering the message to the Iraqi ambassador at the United Nations while sitting in his residence under a portrait of Saddam Hussein that we were bombing Baghdad. So, and then went to the Security Council with the proof of it. So I think that we acted very well on that, and should be a sign that we were prepared to use military force when it was appropriate and we had intelligence in order to make it effective. I think on the issue of '98, we were prepared to use force and did use it immediately after the bombings of the embassies. As I said earlier, on actionable intelligence, I believed and continue to believe that the plant in Sudan was connected to this network that Osama bin Laden had in Sudan, and that it was an appropriate strike. And as you point out, and I think this is the very hard part for all of us, Mr. Secretary, is that we have to put ourselves into the pre-9/11 mode, and that it was, and it's hard because we've all been in our post-9/11 prism where we should be, and yet things were very different before 9/11. And as you point out, we were mostly accused of overreacting, not underreacting. And I believe we reacted appropriately, and as I said earlier, we would have acted more had we had actionable intelligence. And so I think we dealt very appropriately with the issue, and I think our record stands well.
The reports at the time and subsequently have appeared in various places that the evidence involved with the pharmaceutical plant not only involved Al-Qaeda and specifically Osama, but also the Iraqi various programs within the Iraqi government, let us say. Did you see any significance in that as something to worry about? Perhaps the Iraqis' involvement with Osama might be a bit more than might appear?
I did not make the connection, but let me just say this, is that if you look at the record, I was as hawkish on Saddam Hussein as anybody, made more statements and took more actions, whether I was ambassador at the United Nations or Secretary of State, in terms of trying to contain Saddam Hussein and make sure that he proceeded in terms of trying to live up to or fulfill the Security Council resolutions. And so I did not or do not remember making a link between what was happening in Sudan and the Iraqis. I don't know, Tom, whether you have any.
Mr. Secretary, I also participated in the meetings leading up to that decision. There were two pieces of evidence only that I was aware of that I thought were very, very important and that helped, I believe, to crystallize the decision. One was the report we had following chemical analysis of the actual sample of a precursor to VX nerve gas that did not occur in nature. It was very unique and was not used for any other known purpose. And the other was the connection that the Secretary just talked to you about of the plant with investments and activities of Osama bin Laden in Sudan. As you know, he spent time in Sudan prior to the attack on the plant. And I was not aware of any Iraqi connection until after the attack.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Let me shift to Saudi Arabia. As I'm sure you all know, it is a kind of a sort of common wisdom, or in the State Department, one would say an urban myth, that the culture of the department is ruled by a pro-Saudi, pro-Sunni bent. And there are things that certainly give credence to that in the record leading up to 9/11. The fact that state never made any démarche to get after the Saudis had perhaps the second most powerful man in Al-Qaeda in their possession from 95 on, and didn't tell us for some time, and to this day has not been turned over to us. The fact that the activities of the Saudi Ministry of Religious Affairs have really never gotten even onto the scope of the agenda between Saudi Arabia and the United States. The flow, this constant promotion of jihadist ideology around the world. In your time, and the fact, of course, that which has recently become an issue, that despite the fact that the priests and ministers are in jail in Saudi for having Christian services, they are nevertheless, Saudi was never listed on the annual list of State Department states who don't offer religious freedom. In your time, did you find one last, that in our last hearing, Ms. Ryan, who headed the consular service, explained that the reason special attention was not given to Saudis seeking visas, even after Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, for instance, was indicted and he was given a visa, was because the State Department had Saudi Arabia in a most favored nation status. And indeed, when we had the officer who did stop one of the hijackers, he said that he came under pressure from his colleagues because picking on a Saudi was very much not acceptable. Do you find this was a problem? Is there a cultural problem, or is this purely a myth?
Well, I don't think there's a cultural problem. I think that basically there are those in the department that are responsible for our relationships with Saudi Arabia, and there are people in the department who are responsible for our relationships with Israel or in other countries. And I think that as Secretary and as Undersecretary, we took all those issues under consideration, obviously. I do think, as I said earlier, our relationship with Saudi Arabia is an incredibly complicated one. We had forces stationed there. We were trying to figure out how to deal with Iraq. We understood the role of Saudi Arabia within the Arab world, and we pressed them. I personally pressed them on issues to do, believe it or not, on women's rights. I pressed them on the religious issues. I pressed them on questions to do with how they were using their charitable money. And we did push them at a variety of times. And as I said earlier, the record is mixed. But the relationship is complicated, and there are divisions within Saudi society, and I think it will continue to be a highly complex relationship for the United States.
Also, Mr. Secretary, on the visa case, as I know all of you know from your own work and some of the work that has been done ahead of time, the State Department officers issuing visas relied on something called a watch list. And in fact, the State Department had taken the initiative to develop the watch list in connection with certain criminal activities and then expanded it in cooperation with the intelligence community to try to deal with terrorism, as we all saw terrorism becoming a much more serious problem. And the tragedy of the issue is that apparently there was information available to the intelligence community, but it did not get into the watch list, something that every State Department officer in Saudi Arabia issuing visas had to consult before even thinking about issuing a visa. And that unfortunately, the intelligence we had in our possession, again, some of the stovepiping problem you related earlier, and some of the compartmentation issue, or some of the, I think, maybe uncertainty in the intelligence community about the importance of getting that information to the visa officers. Visa officers interview people often to determine whether they're going to overstay their visa, become immigrants without going through the appropriate processes. I don't know that visa officers, except by happenstance, have any particular ability to detect terrorists, but maybe we have new profiles now that will help. But the watch list was the basis for that, and unfortunately, in that particular case, the watch list was not up to date, and therefore, we missed those individuals that should have been caught by the visa process.
Thank you.